Wind damage to asphalt shingles. What are some of the causes and factors that contribute to it, and how do you spot it? Let's talk about that. So maybe you suffered some wind damage to your roof, or maybe you're just strangely curious about wind damage, what the causes are, and what factors are at play, and what wind damage looks like. But whatever the case is, let's talk a little more about it. So the biggest factor at play here is going to be the wind itself. And I know that kind of goes without saying, but there are a lot of things that you might not have considered. So obviously you've got the things that come to top of mind, like the wind intensity, how fast is the wind blowing, the direction of the wind, the duration of the windstorm or the storm itself. Those are all big factors, but smaller factors include things like, do you have large trees around your home? Do you have other homes or other obstructions that are going to block and deflect some of that wind? Or are you the home that's sitting up on top of the hill that just catches all of the wind? All of those things are going to be big factors that play into whether or not your roof on your home suffers wind damage. Another thing that's worth considering is the age of the roof. This is also another factor at play here. So the older the roof is, the more susceptible it's going to be. I know sometimes as we get older, we don't want to hear this, but just like as we get older, as your roof gets older, it's more susceptible to injuries. And I'm starting to learn this myself, especially with young kids that seem to rough me up from time to time. So, if you've got a brand new roof, it's going to be able to stay strong and withstand that windstorm a lot better than an older roof that's been aged and just been exposed to the elements for many, many, many years. So the next factor that we should note is going to be the quality of materials. And I know oftentimes it may seem like, hey, a shingle is a shingle, but trust me, that's not true. There are drastic differences in the quality of shingles. So some of the things in regards to quality that can impact your roof and its ability to withstand windstorms are going to be the weight of the shingle, the adhesion strip that seals the two shingles together and doesn't allow wind to get underneath the shingle and lift it up, and the nail strip where the installers will nail one shingle down, and as you overlap those shingles, the size of that zone of that nail strip is going to determine whether or not they're hitting the other shingle underneath. Now that kind of gets into a little bit of the installation itself and the craftsmanship involved, but it does help when you have a shingle that has a wider nail pattern. So the quality of the shingles are definitely something that are going to have an impact on whether or not they can withstand that. Now, all shingles have different ratings for this reason. They're all tested in laboratories and they're all assigned ratings. The lower end shingles are assigned ratings usually of as low as 55 miles per hour, believe it or not. The next level is going to be anywhere between the 110 to 130 mile per hour rating. Now, that's under laboratory conditions, so keep in mind there's too many variables in the field, and that lower wind speeds could cause damage as well as poor install, which we'll talk about next. Okay, so now let's talk about the quality of the installation and the craftsmanship. And this is an area that we see a lot of problems manifesting from. We see this a lot in new construction. We see homes that are anywhere between 3 to 15 years old that suffer a lot of wind damage. And there's a combination of reasons. Part of the reason is that usually newer home builders use low quality materials, but the installers also aren't exercising necessarily the same level of attention to detail that you're going to get from a roofing professional who's doing either new installs or re-roofs. And what ends up happening is a few things. You either have improper nail placement, so the shingles aren't nailed in the proper locations, which makes them very susceptible to wind damage. You have not enough nails being used, which is another factor in and of itself, because it's not going to have the holding and the staying power that it's supposed to per the manufacturer, and it's going to be more susceptible to wind damage because of that. And you have nails that are overdriven through the shingles. So you're basically tearing too far, the nail is puncturing too deep through that matting of the shingle that a little bit of wind gets underneath it and it just rips it right off. So these are factors, unfortunately, that can be controlled, right? Like other factors can't necessarily be as easily controlled for the positive or negative. You can't control the wind, you can't control the storm patterns. You do get to pick your shingle, but you have a known fixed expectation there as far as what the testing is and what levels of wind they're supposed to be able to stand up to. But when it comes to the install, you just sometimes don't know what you're getting. And unfortunately, we see this too often in new construction, and homeowners are frustrated because they just bought this new home. It's only 3 years old, and they just keep having shingles blow off left and right. And I'll tell you that even high-end home builders seem to have this problem. In our experience, we've repaired many homes by high-end home builders as well as big brands, and it's usually the same story. There's improper nail placement, nails are driven too deep, shingles blow off. Homeowner's not happy. We fix it. So we talked about the factors that are going to affect and contribute to the likelihood or the severity of wind damage. We talked about the wind itself, we talked about the quality of the materials, we talked about the age of the materials, the age of the shingles, and we talked about the installation. So now let's talk about what wind damage looks like other than the obviously missing shingles and how to identify it. Okay, so I think we all know what it looks like to have shingles missing from our roof. So we're just gonna breeze on past that one, and we're gonna move right into creased shingles. And yes, I was trying to make a silly dad joke there, so hopefully I got a chuckle. But when we're talking about creased shingles, what we're talking about is the shingle has been lifted up and folded backwards to the point where it actually creased the shingle itself and caused degranulation. Now, sometimes this is visible from the ground, sometimes it's not, and you actually have to get on the roof to find this, but it is damage, and the cause of it is that the adhesive strip that seals down the exposed portion of the shingle, the tab of the shingle, to the shingle underneath it, that has become loose and it is broke free, and then the wind gets underneath that and folds that tab back to the point where it actually creases it. Now, you may see sometimes that the asphalt adhesive strip has become loose and the shingles may lift and blow in the wind, which is not good, but it may not be to the point where it's actually caused creasing. And although creased shingles might not sound like that big of a deal, they really are, because the shingles are going to fail at some point once that's happened, and they are going to blow off completely or break. They can't be repaired, and they do need to be replaced. And the precursor to a folded or creased shingle is going to just be a lifted shingle. So what's a lifted shingle? Well, a lifted shingle is simply a shingle that you can see actually moving in the wind a little bit. You can see the tab of the shingle moving. So that's the precursor to having those folded or creased shingles and or completely missing shingles. Those are lifted shingles, and those are something that do need to be taken care of. That is wind damage that is not going to resolve itself in most cases. Now, let me throw a caveat out here. There are times where that adhesive strip can become detached, and then when they heat up again and during a good warm day, they can seal themselves, but usually they don't. Dirt and debris will blow up under the shingles. They will and kind of gum up that asphalt strip, and it'll never reseal. So it's something you do need to take care of. One other thing that's important to note when we talk about the assessment of what wind damage looks like, and that's how the quality of the shingles do play into the things we just discussed. So the heavier shingles and the more high quality shingles, they're going to usually have better, wider adhesive strips and more adhesive that was applied to the underside of those shingles so that they do seal down better. It just is what it is. With lower quality budget materials, they're not going to apply as much adhesive, which ultimately is going to make those even more susceptible to wind damage. So that's something that you do have to keep in mind when you're installing a roof or having a roof replaced, is the quality of the materials and how that can really have a serious impact down the road. So a phone call that we get quite often is from a homeowner a week or 2 or 3 or a month or 2 months after a windstorm, calling because they have missing shingles, and they're just confused because they say, this storm came through, my neighbors had missing shingles, but I didn't have any, and I came home today and I have shingles in the yard. What gives? Well, let me tell you, what happens is that they actually sustained wind damage during that windstorm. They just didn't realize it. In a lot of situations, entire sections of shingles can be lifted up, pulled free, and then the wind just drops them right back down where they were. And then that adhesive strip reseals so they look like they're connected to the roof like they're supposed to be. You don't see missing shingles. It looks good from the ground, but the nails have already been pulled free, or they're significantly much more loose than they should be. then a small storm or just a little bit of wind comes through, and boom, there you go. You got shingles in the yard, and you're calling us out to fix it. So that's another aspect of, wind damage that sometimes goes unnoticed for quite some time, and it can take several subsequent storms after the fact for that to actually dislodge the shingles to the point where you know that you obviously have a problem. All right, I think we've hit the nail on the head when it comes to what the factors are that relate to wind damage and what wind damage looks like. So now let's talk about the big question, the question that affects all homeowners and property owners, and something that requires a lot of consideration. And that's whether or not a repair is reasonable and feasible, or whether or not the roof should be replaced. Now, let me tell you this because this is important. You should never just call your insurance company before you call a roofer when it comes to wind damage. Now, many good adjusters, especially if you have someone that's local, they will tell you this. They will tell you to call a roofer, and the reason is many wind damage issues can be resolved with simple fixes. Now, not all can, but many can. And what you don't want is to have an adjuster come out, open a claim, and just tell you that it's below your deductible, which leaves you with a no payout claim on your record because it fell below that deductible threshold. You don't want that. So always call a roofer, a reputable local contractor, have them come look at it and have them advise you on what they think. And if they've been around a minute, they should know, they should understand how it all works. It is tough to get insurance companies to pay for full replacements on wind damage. That at least in our area here in North Texas, that's just the way it is. In most cases, they want to do repairs, even if it's to entire slopes of the roof. And in a lot of cases, that can be reasonable. Now, there are exceptions where that's not reasonable and a full replacement is warranted, but every situation has to be looked at differently. So what are some of the situations where a repair is warranted? Well, obviously, if you just have a small area of shingles that are missing, you have a thorough inspection. There are shingles available. We're not talking about discontinued shingles that can't be found anymore. So there are shingles available that are reasonable matches in like, kind, and quality, is what insurance companies would say. Then we can do a repair. If you have large sections of the roof missing, or you potentially have an outdated shingle that is no longer manufactured and we can't get comparable materials to do a repair with, then you're probably looking at full replacement. And then the other factor is, and this is a really big one in the last 2 years or so, is the repairability of your roof. So if your roof is just really old, it might be so brittle and aged that we can't effectively remove the damaged shingles and work in the new shingles into that area. We're just going to continuously cause damage to the shingles all around it. So all of these things go into play when we come out and inspect a roof and we advise a homeowner on whether or not we think that this is a small repair that could be anywhere from $400 to $1,500, or if we think that we're getting to the point where we should probably go ahead and reach out to their insurance company and push for a full replacement. A lot of factors at play here. You just got to make sure you have somebody on your side that can give you good advice, because when it comes to whether or not that wind damage is repairable versus the necessity for replacement, it can be the Wild West, and you can have people that steer you in the wrong direction. So I hope you've learned a lot here about what wind damage is, how to look for it, what the factors are, and most importantly, when can you repair it and when should you replace it. Take care.